Welcome to tonight's show. From a secure location in southwest Scotland, the artist known as John Morris has emerged. His aim is to enthrall, leave you in awe, and entertain with his brand of artwork. This is The Artist. Tonight the artist will show you how to paint one of his legendary seascape paintings. He begins with an 18 by 24 inch canvas, covered in black paint, and the black paint is allowed to dry. This enables the canvas to push the colours out once painted on top. The artist comes in with a layer of white paint and phthalo blue on a 2-inch brush. He begins working from side to side. Notice the type of brushstrokes that he's using. He reloads the brush, adds a tiny amount of water, and continues to work the paint side to side. Nothing too difficult about this so far. The artist will cover the top half of the canvas in this beautiful bright phthalo blue colour. If you're using oil paint, be sure to use turpentine as opposed to water for spreading the paint. It's also fantastic for cleaning your brushes. The artist then comes in with a 1.5 inch brush, taps the corner into some white paint, and begins making some micro circles on the canvas. This is to put clouds into the sky. If you've painted with us before, you will have seen this technique a few times. The artist then begins adding another technique where he was just tapping there slightly. He then cleans off the brush, and then with a clean dry 1.5 inch brush he begins working the underside of the clouds. This is to fluff them up. The lightest area of the clouds is where it is closest to the sun, and the darkest, most fluffy area is usually at the base of the cloud. He then comes in, reloads the brush, and begins adding a little bit more cloud just to the surface of the water. You can see there where that horizon line is, where the painting will separate out. The artist continues to work in those semicircles, just working around and around and around, very small and focused shapes. Each time he goes back in and reloads the brush with white paint, until he has enough cloud cover. He fluffs the clouds, just by blending a little bit more, gently goes over the top, and he's all set. The artist is working with a multitude of brushes tonight, so when you see him looking down towards the easel, he's selecting each brush for each technique. He produces the filbert brush, loads it with a little bit of paint. Let's see what he's going in. He's loading it with black paint, a small amount of water, and he's going to paint mountains in the distance. Now for this, the top line of the mountain is the most important. Then he blends on the mountain out and begins just adding a little bit of haze just underneath. He's just using the paint that's already on the canvas. Because these mountains are away in the distance, you won't see too much detail upon them. Remember, the further away something is, the lighter and less detailed it will be. The closer it is, the more detailed and darker it will be. He then comes in with his micro fan brush, loads into a little bit of titanium white, and begins making those little rocking motions. This is essential for distant waves. In a second you'll see here in a little bit of closer detail on how he's doing this. If you're an artist who likes to stand up, this is the kind of stance that you want to be taking. Here we can see in closer detail how the artist is creating that rocking motion, just rocking gently side to side, barely touching the canvas. It's essential to leave an area of black paint so as you've got the different tones and shadows and shades that you need to make this illusion look correct. He then loads the brush with phthalo blue and white. Phthalo blue on one side, white on the other, kind of like the artist's makeup. He then begins working underneath the original light colour that he put on. This again is to add another dynamic to his painting. Just working side to side with that rocking motion, hardly touching the canvas, but when he does, very, very light. Smaller brushes work best for this technique. He then comes in with a long-haired script liner brush, a little bit of water and some titanium white, and begins putting the base layer and the base line for his distant wave. In this painting, the artist has told us that he will have two waves, one middle distance and one closer up. The first line that you saw was the middle distance. This is the wave that's closer up. The artist then begins putting more detail into his wave. He's actually changed and decided he wants 3 waves. Maybe he knows something we don't. Remember again that the artist is composing this right in front of your very eyes. So everything you see here is literally coming straight from his head. He then comes in with a 1/4 inch brush, a little bit of white paint, and begins tapping on that line that he's just made, creating a little bit of foam on top of the wave. This is what brings it to life. Keeps reloading the brush and just works around that line that he just created. The artist then comes in with a filbert brush and begins putting in the base layer for the distant wave. A little bit of titanium white, a little bit of phthalo blue, and he's just creating a rocking motion almost in a banana shape. If a banana was to be held vertical, this is the kind of motion that you would see. From this angle we get a highly detailed view on just how the artist is creating these beautiful colours. He's got white on one side of the brush and blue on the other. He's using that rocking motion that we spoke about earlier on, or banana techniques as he called it. He's added a little bit of Mars black, and just underneath that top white line, he's just adding in a little bit of shadow and shading. To do all this with a simple brush, with one colour, would take far too long, and you wouldn't necessarily achieve the same technique. This two-tone technique that the artist absolutely recommends, and absolutely loves, and has used for many years in his own paintings, is a perfect way to be able to do this technique really quickly and create some awesome effects. He then moves to the second wave. He adds a little bit more phthalo blue, and it's essential for this wave to remain fairly dark, as the wave that's closest to us is going to be our central focus. If the wave behind it is too bright, it will kill all the illusion of effective distance and perspective. He then begins just rocking in a little bit more waves in the far distance, and then touches up a little bit more here. The artist is now showing us where the eye of the wave would be. No, he's not doing something weird. He's got a little bit of white, a little bit of phthalo blue, and he's just working in and scrubbing in a little bit of a circle. This is where the light passes through the wave. This is the brightest part of any wave. He begins working down in those C shapes or banana shapes that we talked about earlier on. Sometimes I wonder why the artist uses different fruits and objects like that, and then he explained it's sometimes simpler with things people can see. He feels this brush is taking a little bit too long, so he switches to a 1.5 inch brush, loads it with white and black, and then just begins pulling in that circular motion. He starts from the top of the wave and pulls down. Because everything is still wet, it means that the colours can all blend together really beautifully. Notice here he's following all the same motions. To learn how to paint waves and to paint them well, it is important to follow the same angles all the time. Remember, you're not pulling straight down. Waves do not go straight up and straight down. They always go in a roll-in motion. Sometimes it's hard for artists to visualize that motion. We can see here quite clearly how the artist has used a lot of technique and just base colour. From the light side to the dark side. He then touches in with a little bit of Mars black, and because the paint is still fairly wet, he can blend these colours in to make it darker on the right and still light on the left. Light and shadow is another thing that brings your art to life. Perspective is number 1, light and darkness is number 2, in terms of the techniques and the importance of them. Just look there on how much that wave actually looks like it's a real wave. It'll look even more real once the artist puts in the final touches. The artist then loads a microfan brush with titanium white and a small amount of water. He's then pulling from the corner of the wave over in a C shape. This is how the wave starts to come to life. It's almost the break of the wave where the water is coming over, the foam is underneath. The darkness underneath is essential for this technique to work, because otherwise you've just got one big white splodge. As you can see here, where the artist is working currently, it now looks like a wave is actually coming over. You can almost smell the sea and the salt and maybe even the seaweed, and imagine yourself being there. You can almost imagine yourself just with the waves lapping up against the shore. Seagulls flying by. I'm not a big fan of seagulls, I have to say. The artist is then using a little bit of white paint just to create the more foamy effects that's coming on the top. What the artist tends to do is paint a rock just under the left side, just under where his nose is now. The reason that he does that is because it gives the illusion that when the wave is hitting the rock that everything's just spraying up. This is an amazing effect, and hopefully the artist will teach us this tonight. He reloads the brush, gets a good sharp point, tiny amount of water. The water always helps the paint spread, just the same as turpentine does with oil paint. He then touches up that top line just to give it some more definition. And then just begins tapping under the distant wave. There doesn't need to be too much detail here because it is far away in the distance, and we're more concerned about what's closer up. Again, he's just adding highlight, just to those distant waves. This time he's got a little bit of black on one side and white on the other. He's doing this just to add a little bit more shadow underneath. Again, all of it is essential to make this painting come to life. We're about halfway through the show now, and already you can start to see how this painting has come to life from nothing into something. The paint in the front is now dried a little bit more, so you can come in with a 1/4" brush, a little bit of titanium white, and again he's tapping around the base and the foamy part of the wave. The aim for this is for it to be as white as possible. He then comes in with the script liner brush, loads it with a little bit of water and some titanium white, and then begins adding a few little foam patterns. Again, remember the shape of the wave. You're not just coming straight down, you want to have them almost like a lightning effect, zigzagging down and coming round in that curve. From this angle we can see it a little bit clearer on how the artist is creating this. Remembering those curves and rolls and banana shapes that we spoke about earlier on? Well, we use the same technique when we're doing this. A short hair liner brush or a large hair liner brush is really good for this technique because it gives you a lot of creative freedom, and it's almost just like using a pen or a pencil just across to create the wave's foam. He does this from one side of the wave to the other, just a small amount of detail. When you're doing this, try and think about things that could be in the water. So for example, yes, you've got your foam patterns, but you might also have seaweed or maybe a crab, or who knows, maybe a duck or something in there. The artist is just pulling around with some of those distant waves. He then touches a little bit of black paint, mixes with a little bit of water, and then just works a highlight line underneath the foam pattern of the wave. This is just a separator colour to add a little bit more definition and detail onto it. As we've said before, the artist has no substitute for detail. His main focus is always with an attention to it. You can see the concentration and the steely expression on the artist. It never changes. He begins adding a little bit more highlight into that second wave. Everything he's doing here is to create the illusion of shadow, tone and perspective. This is what brings your paintings to life. It gives it more of a 3D effect as opposed to a boring old flat kind of effect. He gives a little rub with his finger. Sometimes that's not always a bad thing. The artist then comes in with a filbert brush and the two-tone technique that we spoke about before. White on one side of the brush and black on the other. He then begins creating half circles. As we can see from this angle here, it's just a roll and a turn of the brush. The white wants to be on the top side of the brush because the white represents the light. The dark wants to be on, obviously, the other side of the brush because it represents the darkness and the shadow. This is a simple way to create simple little rocks really quickly. Some people struggle with this technique with a filbert brush, so it may take some practice. He then cleans the brush, comes in with a little bit of titanium white, a little bit of blue, and a little bit of black to create sort of a grey-blue effect. Remember, this is the shadow, the absence of light section of the painting, so we don't want too much light to be down there, just a few highlights. Again, using that rocking motion both in the wave itself and then in the base where the sea is just sort of rolling around. He then touches in with a little bit of titanium white, maybe where there's a little bit of foam that's just lapping up underneath those beautiful little rocks that he's created. A zigzagging motion always creates great effects for water. Remember, water doesn't flow just in one direction, but it certainly does fill up everything. This certainly looks like a Scottish painting, no doubt about that. The artist then comes in with a little bit of water and Mars black, and begins adding more highlight to those mountains. By doing so, he actually adds more detail to them, but also brings them a little bit closer. As we've said before, sometimes you only see these things when you're actually painting. The artist knows what he's doing. He's been doing it for a long time. The artist's hair almost reminds me that it could be a windy day in this part of the world. Reloading the brush with a little bit of titanium white, the artist then comes in and adds a few more detailed clouds to his sky. Again, making those circular shapes. Sometimes this can only be done once the paint is completely dried. So we saw how he did his base colour earlier on, well now he's adding more detailed clouds into the sky. Again, notice the shapes that the artist is making, notice the size of the clouds as well. Where many students have issues with clouds is they forget that clouds are not all one giant white splodge. They're small, delicate, and each one individually shaped. Try going up and down in that circular motion. That takes some practice. You could almost believe that this was maybe Troon Beach on a slightly stormy day. Maybe even a partially sunny day. The mountains that you see in the distance could even be the Isle of Arran. If you've never been there, it's certainly something to check out. The artist again used that blending motion on the belly side of the clouds in order just to create a softer effect. Remember, want the sharpness to be on the top, the softness to be on the bottom. The artist takes a good look at it. I wonder what he's thinking. He's checking to see if anything else needs to be added. The only thing he needs to add now is his signature to it. In the bottom right hand corner where the artist always signs his artwork. He's got one final thing that he wants to add. This is a wonderful technique to show how to create spray. The artist touches into a little bit of titanium white, a small amount of water, and then just with his finger he's creating spray just where the wave is hitting the rock. Just like that, we brought the painting to life. And just like that, he's done another one. That brings us to the end of tonight's show. YouTube.com/John Morris Art from the Heart is the place to go for all your painting needs. From art tips, art tutorials, and to see how things are put together. Come and find us over there, youtube.com/John Morris Art from the Heart. Like, share and subscribe, and tune in next week.